As the war in Ukraine rages on, nearly 18 months since it first began, there seems to be no end in sight for the violence. This with Russia launching three waves of nighttime air attacks against the southern city of Odessa. The Ukrainian Air Force said on Monday that it intercepted all 15 incoming drones and missiles, and Odessa officials said falling debris from the interceptions damaged the dormitory of an educational facility in the city, a residential building, and a supermarket. The Kremlin's forces have pummeled Odessa in recently, aiming at facilities that transport Ukraine's crucial grain exports, and also wrecking cherished Ukrainian historical sites. Well, joining us now from Ukraine in Odessa is journalist Adam Zivo. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we know you've spent quite a bit of time in Odessa, so how are the people in the city dealing with these constant attacks? What's the overall sentiment being felt there?
Well, I mean, it sounds horrible to say this, but people are used to this by now. I mean, they've been dealing with drones and missile attacks for over a year. So it's just more of the same. I mean, obviously, when the cathedral was hit, that was very upsetting for people. No one was able to sleep for days because they were hearing air raid sirens every night and they were hearing explosions. But people find a way to still live their lives. And when you go through downtown Odessa, people are still shopping on the streets. They're still eating at cafes and restaurants. People are still going to the beach, primarily because after a year of war, you need that for your mental health. And you also need that to sustain the economy.
Unfortunate, but understandable, Mr. Zivo. Now, we know the Russian military claims that they are not targeting civilians, but based on what you've seen on the ground, is this accurate?
Absolutely not. I mean, the cathedral that was hit recently was in no way near anything that had anything of military value. It was just beside a large park where children would play and old men would play chess. It was in the center of the historical downtown where nothing of any military value is located. So the idea that there could be anything that would be a legitimate target in the area is ridiculous. Across Ukraine, we become very used to Russia targeting civilians and then claiming ridiculously that they're not doing so. But we all know that this is happening. I've seen countless residential buildings that have been hit. It's appalling.
Appalling indeed, Mr. Zivo. Now, we know that Odessa is a vital export area for grain, and Russia has been targeting Odessa since the cancellation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. But are there any other reasons why the Russian military continues to bomb the city?
It's an act of psychological terrorism, right? I mean, Odessa is considered to be a very important city in the Russian imagination, and it was considered to be one of the jewels for this invasion. The idea that Russia would be able to finally retake control over Odessa. Odessa has not been captured, and Odessans have turned decisively away from Russia. You know, about 15 years ago, the city was quite pro-Russian, but that's no longer the case. And it seems that the Kremlin has responded to this by acting like a jilted and jealous ex-lover who says that if I can't have you, no one can. Hence the attacks on the city's heritage.
And on that note, why do you think Russia seems to be bombing these historical sites in particular? Does this play maybe into a larger strategy in this invasion?
I mean, once again, because Russia hasn't been able to make substantial gains in terms of territory, what it's resorted to is just psychological terrorism. We saw that throughout the winter with the attacks on the electrical infrastructure. You know, I was in Odessa about the entire time. We only had electricity for about 9 hours a day in 3 hour spurts, right? And there was no real purpose to that aside from making life as uncomfortable for civilians as possible. So this is just an extension of that strategy. Terrorize Ukrainians, break their will to fight, and destroy their culture and their heritage. But unfortunately, Ukrainians are very resilient. Well, unfortunately for Russia, and that kind of strategy just isn't going to work.
There seems to be multiple layers in this invasion. Now, we know you've been following this war, providing your on-the-ground perspective since it began in February 2022. So can you tell us a little bit more about your personal experience throughout all of this?
Well, I initially came to report on the war, and then idiotically, I fell in love with the Ukrainian in Odessa, hence why I've been living here for the past year. It's been very challenging. You know, spending 3 months in the winter without electricity certainly has some inconveniences. And I found that personally at this point, I've gotten used to a lot of the things that happen here, much in the same way that the Ukrainians do, or rather have. You know, at this point, air raid sirens or missiles are not a thing that I particularly flinch at. which sounds astonishing, but when you're here, it's just how life is. It's the new normal here, unfortunately.
It's just how life is. All right, Mr. Zivo, we really appreciate all your hard work and are looking forward to following your reporting. Thank you again for your time today.
Thanks for having me.